Hello and a very happy Friday, folks, and a very warm welcome back to Team JLX podcast with me, Xander, as always. I hope you're all well. Today we're going to be chatting through PCOS. Now, you may be well aware that we once did a podcast with our lovely client Laura, and she spoke through her experiences with PCOS, and we did also talk about some of the facts and figures as well. We talked about some of the data, we talked about some of the symptoms, and we went through her journey and what she experienced. It was an absolutely marvelous podcast, and if you are somebody who struggles with PCOS or would like to understand some more about that from the perspective of somebody who struggles. For example, if you're a male listening to this and maybe you live with somebody who struggles with PCOS, it might be a really good option for you to go and check that out, because you may hear some other experiences alongside your partners that may really benefit you. And I do truly believe it's a really good way to educate ourselves. So do go and check that out. So why am I doing another one? I'm doing another one because today my aim is to be short, concise, and to the point, which is completely against everything I do when I talk. But I have my tablet. So if you watch this on YouTube, if you see me looking left, it's because I actually have at the top of my screen on my tablet, stick to the plan. If you're listening to this on Spotify or any other podcasting platform, you're probably thinking, what the hell is going on? So if you missed it a few weeks ago, I don't script any of my podcasts. I just come on here with an idea that I want to talk about and I'll talk, because I can't read very well. So for me, what I end up doing is getting nervous about what I'm reading, and then I choke on my words. So I find it better just to go, right, I know what I want to talk about, let's go for it. However, I have so much I want to get through that I've written myself a little plan today, and the aim is to stick to said plan as I've written at the top of my screen. So without further ado, like I said, we're going to make this short and concise. I'm not going to go into, just before I start, I'm not going to go into the data in terms of like statistics and things like that, because anybody can Google that. You can Google that. The key part of this podcast and the key aim of this podcast is to provide context, is to provide experience and insight into working with people who have struggled with PCOS. Because if you're listening to this and you struggle with PCOS, what you'll know is that you probably struggle with fat loss, you probably struggle with weight management, you probably struggle with emotional eating, and you probably struggle with a whole host of different things that come alongside that. But I think that when you're in a circle of people who aren't fitness related, so let's say, for example, in your group of friends, you have PCOS and two other ladies have PCOS, which, given the statistics, is not too unlikely. It may be that you're really into your fitness and they aren't, so they don't really understand the struggles that you're trying to overcome in order to hit the goals that you're trying to hit in your fitness journey. As it happens, and luckily for you, I do understand that, at least from a coach's perspective. Obviously, I do not have PCOS, but I do understand it from all the clients I've worked with over the years and the help that we've given them. So that's why I'm doing this. I'm doing this to give inspiration and hope. That is my aim. So let's get into this. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or if you find this podcast helpful and you think that somebody else would, please do share it, and obviously pop it on your stories. If you watch it over on Instagram, that would be super helpful. And of course, do tag me. And if you have any questions, you know exactly where I am. It's my pleasure to help you. Okay, so the first thing we're going to go through is actually, what is it? So PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. And the interesting thing about this is that there are no cysts involved. I think people think cystic, they think cysts. Now, what actually PCOS is, it's essentially follicles that are inside the ovaries, kind of like sacs that produce eggs, but not very efficiently. And this is where some of the issues alongside fertility come, because they don't produce those eggs as regularly as they should, which means, of course, if we're not producing the eggs, then fertility is going to be a challenge. And that is one of the symptoms of PCOS, is that fertility levels are usually very low. That doesn't mean that you can't conceive, it just means it is far more of a challenge. So that's pretty much what it is, in the sense of, you know, what actually, if you were to say, could you show it, that would be how you kind of showed it, if you like. In terms of the symptoms, because let's be honest, no one can actually see there. So if you were thinking, oh, how would I know I had it? It's usually the symptoms of PCOS that young women, or women in general, I shouldn't just say young women, women in general would notice first. So The key symptoms that you maybe notice: irregular periods, so technically termed oligomenorrhea, easy for me to say, and that basically means inconsistent periods. So you'll have one, but then you may not have one for a couple of months. There's no structure to it. You know, most women who will have one, you know, every 26 to 32 days, so somewhere around the 28-day mark. But for people who struggle with PCOS, it's very irregular. Now, some people may have more irregular ones. Some people may not. I know that when Laura and I spoke on the podcast we did before, she spoke about her experiences with this, and her experiences definitely were very inconsistent. So it depends, but generally I do believe that inconsistencies with periods is very much a symptom that many women will struggle with. Now, the next one is to do with hormone imbalances. Now, you may have heard this through many different, you know, grapevines, but essentially hyperandrogenism, hyper, so Hyper, not PO, so hypo would be low, hyper is high. So if you ever, by the way, little fun fact for you, hyper, so if you were very hot, hypothermic, or hypo is cold. So if you're ever wondering why the difference is there. So again, look at me getting carried away. Back on track. So where were we? We were talking about hyperandrogenism. So essentially, both males and females have a set hormone system. Okay, that's very clear, I believe. Whereas with PCOS, hyperandrogenism is basically where the female will have a higher level of the male sex hormone testosterone, essentially. What that basically means is that the other three symptoms then come into play. So people who struggle with PCOS also tend to have slightly deeper voices. Again, not true for everyone, but I'm not going to keep doing this actually. Just understand that not everybody has these symptoms, but they are very common. So a deeper voice. More hair. So typically, if you look at, say, me, I have facial hair. I also have hair on my chest. I have actually no hair on my back, weirdly. Not that you needed to know that, but these are areas where women can grow hair as a result of those hyperandrogens, so testosterone. So deeper voice, we've also got more hair, and then we've also got things like the irregular period. So they're the kind of three that we've touched on so far. We've already touched on infertility or the struggle with fertility, not necessarily infertility because some people with PCOS will still be able to conceive. Other things that now you can't see, and these are arguably from a health factor, the more considerable challenges that women with PCOS have. So one of them is insulin resistance. Now, you may not have heard of insulin resistance, or you may have done when it comes to people who are diabetic. So diabetes is and I'm not going to go down that road actually. Let me come back to, see what I'm doing? I'm doing really well today. The reason that insulin resistance is a problem is because when we eat food, it's not just carbohydrate, even though people demonize carbohydrate for this. When we eat food, we get a spike in blood sugar because basically what happens is that as we go through the digestive process, the food is broken down, it's taken into the bloodstream because the bloodstream is a transport system. And this is what people miss out on all the time. The bloodstream is a transport system. So for us to shuttle things to where they need to go, our bodies will use that transport system. So if we need to get carbohydrate to a muscle that's working specifically hard, the body will use that transport system. So when people start freaking out that they've got higher blood sugars at certain times, it's perfectly reasonable because the body is transporting. It's exactly like the M25 that goes around London, massive motorway for those of you in the US, huge motorway. That thing gets very, very busy around rush hour because people are trying to get to places. Exactly like when we eat a lot of food, we digest it, and then we're sending it to places where it's going to be used in the energy process, such as muscle work in a gym. So we're going to get higher levels of blood sugar when we eat. So when we eat, what then happens is that insulin comes in, and basically insulin is a little bit like a coach. Imagine 50,000 coaches, right, going down the motorway. They're going to pick up all the random people that are walking along the motorway, and they're going to shuttle them into where they need to go. So let's say, for example, you have your 50,000 coaches go along, they pick up all the blood sugar, not all of it, but a majority of the blood sugar, and they'll shuttle that to the cell of the muscle where it can be used. All right, so it's a bit like a park and ride. It'll come pick you up, take you to your office, lovely jubbly. Now, that is how insulin works in a normal functioning body. However, if you have, say, diabetes, or you are insulin resistant, so insulin resistance is pretty much diabetes, but I'm not going to go into that. What happens is that we are less able, so less sensitive to that insulin. So for example, if we still had the same amount of insulin, instead of them picking up 50 people on their coach, they only may pick up 5, which means we need to spit out more insulin to be able to go and pick up the remaining. Or if that can't happen, we end up with higher levels of standing blood sugar, which isn't very good for the body. So we want to maintain something known as homeostasis. And that's typically where everything in the body is as it should be. Okay, imagine the start of a film. At the start of every film, everything's pretty much where it should be, and then everything goes tits up. We want to be the start of the film, just nice and calm. Now, people with high levels of blood sugar can have another series of symptoms off the back of that, which I'm definitely not going into right now, despite my brain telling we should. It's a really good idea, go down that road. Now, because of insulin resistance, this can lead to things like metabolic disorders or metabolic syndrome. Now, metabolic syndrome is things like obesity, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and of course, you'll have high blood sugars as well. Now, all of these things have a risk. Now, all of these things are health risks, and this is where PCOS becomes quite challenging because you can't see any of these things. Obviously, if you are somebody who struggles with obesity with PCOS, again, not everybody. Some people have a leaner version of PCOS. But if you are somebody who struggles with obesity with PCOS, then what you also have is not only the challenges around fertility and things like that, but you may also have the health implications as well, which of course does produce a struggle. And you know, there's in the people that I've worked with, these are kind of the hidden areas of PCOS because you can't see them, and because maybe people don't necessarily talk about those elements. You know, people may be able to talk about fertility and things like that, and that's mostly, I believe, because it's more of an acute situation. If you're, 25 to 30, you may be, maybe younger, maybe older. I'm not prejudicing that, but let's stereotype it to 25 to 30. You might be thinking about having children, okay? So now the concern is around fertility. However, you're not thinking about, when I'm 50 or 60 and I'm really struggling with, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, which again is a common common side effect, unfortunately, or symptom. Now, if you look at all of these things, you can really start to understand why individuals who struggle with PCOS are challenged so much when it comes to health and fitness. They're challenged because they're already on the back foot, and if you're listening to this, hopefully I've nailed the majority of the struggles that you guys are facing. There are obviously so many more, and I'm going to touch on some of the more intricate things when it comes to coaching and kind of the fat loss process now. So, in a fat loss process, we've already kind of labeled the struggles that women with PCOS would struggle with. Now, from my experience, and these aren't necessarily things that everyone will struggle with, and it's really important I say this because it's very easy when somebody gets labeled with something to assume that everything comes with it. And that isn't true, okay? When you buy a house, you only get certain things as a result of buying that house, right? The rest goes with the person who sold it. Same thing with PCOS. Your symptoms will be very different to somebody else's. And the level of those symptoms will also be very different to somebody else's. So I've had clients in the past who have had to go on very, very low calories when it comes to fat loss. And this is why I get so pissed off with people who consistently post on Instagram saying, you shouldn't diet on 1200 calories, it's terrible for you. Because I have clients who diet on 1200 calories, and I can sit here absolutely fine saying that because I know that for them, in order for them to achieve the goal that they want to achieve in terms of their physique, that's unfortunately what they need to do. And you may listen to that and go, oh, that's ridiculous, you shouldn't diet on 1200 calories, but that's fine for you if you don't have to do that, right? If you're someone who can diet on 1800 calories, it may be ridiculous, but let's say you are stuck in the body that you're in now and you're unhappy and uncomfortable and you wanted a body that was slightly smaller and you wanted to feel more comfortable and more confident, would you do what you had to do? And the chances are you probably would. And so we need to be more accepting, I believe, of those people, because I know for a fact, and the individual I have in my mind right now, one of the ladies that I'm working with now, you know, worked with her for a very long period of time. When she first came to me, she couldn't lose any weight, and one of the reasons for that was that she put her calories where everyone else's were. You know, she was saying to me, oh, I can't lose any weight, and I'm eating my 1,700 calories, and I was thinking, wow, that's a high, you know, it's a pretty good you know, many people who burn a lot of calories through the day will be eating 1,700 to 1,800 calories and losing weight. I think it's safe to say the majority of women, depending on size and height, probably somewhere between 1,350 and 1,550, so 1,700 is pretty good. And when we got to it, I remember speaking to her really clearly and having this conversation. I was like, what gave you this number? She's like, well, everyone else is kind of at the 1,700, so I assume that was a great place to start. And she's not wrong, like a great place to start, absolutely. But she wasn't losing any weight and wasn't hungry, had no signs or symptoms of that. So you have to ask the question, well, what do I need to do to get myself into a deficit? And this is it. You need to go lower, and this isn't true for everyone, and I'll keep banging this point home, but it is very important to realize that we all have different circumstances and we all have a different journey that's going to take us to the goal that we want. So like I said, I have some clients who are on 1,200 calories. Now, one of the things I think is very key in doing this is the way that they are supported. So whenever I have clients on lower calories such as that, I always check on them more regularly than I would do with somebody who, say, was on a more average level of calories. Now, we talk to our clients all the time. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, we just don't talk to other people. I just know from my own care level and my own kind of concern that I just want to make sure they are doing okay, because many people, and you might be listening to this thinking the same, but many people would just kind of be like, oh, I'm broken, like I'm the problem, so I'm just going to get my head down and I'm just going to carry on, because, you know, it's not him that the calories aren't wrong, but they can be. Sometimes they can be. And if you're really struggling with lower calories, it's really important that you feel that you can reach out and be like, I'm really struggling and I need help. Or to say, I think this is too much, because that in and of itself lowers the pressure. And anybody here who's done a successful diet will know that when you lower the pressure, you are far more likely to succeed in the goal that you've set, because you won't have that resounding guilt, shame, pressure, tension, you know, focus on that goal at all times until the point where you are essentially just internally combusting, right? And I'm pretty sure we all know what that feels like. So the calories can be lower, and that's a key part of this. With any kind of metabolic syndrome, there are different considerations, but in one of the things that we mention now is that metabolic rate can very much be a bigger challenge, I would say. So some of the clients that we work with do have to have much lower calories. Now, there's a lot of things around like dairy, and there's a lot of things around carbohydrate. To my best knowledge, there is no research to suggest that that is a better option. However, insulin resistance, as we have already discussed, is one of the biggest challenges. So what can we do to maximize our regulation of blood sugar? There's a couple of options. Well, the circadian rhythm, which you guys probably understand is what coordinates our sleep-wake cycles. What you may not know is that it also coordinates our hunger signaling. I don't know about you, but in the Western world, we're incredibly lucky. We're incredibly fortunate to have food omnipresent. Like I could literally leave my house right now and I could find a shop within stupid amount of distance away, like literally a 5-minute walk, and I could go and get something. So food is readily available, okay? But I tell you what, it's coming up to midday here and my stomach's grumbling. I can tell you for free I am not in need of any food right now, but my body is priming itself. It is preparing for food. Now, food preparation in terms of what the body's doing is there as a way to stimulate hunger. It stimulates hunger because it's saying, hey, we need to go get some food. Because our brains are old brains in new bodies, which is a simple or more convoluted way of saying our brains don't realize yet that we can just go get food like that. So they're preparing us to then go hunt, essentially. They're preparing us to go and find that food. And they know that we are having food at this time, you know, pretty much every day. So food is regulated by the circadian rhythm. Now, the other thing, as a result of that, is blood sugar. Now, we manage blood sugar so much better in the mornings. Okay, if you are somebody who works a shift pattern, this is where it becomes quite difficult. And I have a couple of clients trying some different things at the moment with this, but it may be very worthwhile trialing some kind of food restricted eating, so time restricted eating basically, because you are not going to manage blood sugar as well in the middle of the night, because typically that's where we would be sleeping, so we aren't running the same systems that we would be running during the day. And that's where it may work well to have that restrictive window, so that in the morning when you get back, say 7, 8 a.m, having a really big carbohydrate breakfast, because you will manage that carbohydrate load as blood sugar so much more effective. So in terms of energy and obviously how you feel after eating that would be a big difference. Little tidbit there, which hopefully helps. Now, with everybody who's not doing shift patterns, you will benefit just from lowering the carbohydrate content you have in the evenings and pushing it back further in the day. I read a really interesting study a while ago, and it was to do with how we regulate carbohydrate better earlier in the day. But this was actually the effect on mood rather than on PCOS. But insulin resistance, as we know, is a challenge. And we also know that we manage blood sugar so much better in the morning. So it actually makes sense to have bigger carbohydrate meals earlier in the day, and then having more fat and protein dominant meals in the evenings. To be honest, it's kind of different to how most people do it, because most people save calories for the evening, right? Have a little treat after dinner. But if you are struggling with PCOS, it may be better to put your health and the way you feel first and say, right, actually, I am going to have a more fat and protein based dinner, and usually, use my carbohydrates for lunch and probably breakfast in a bit more of an efficient way. Completely up to you. Like I say to all my team, you can try all these things. You're not writing yourself a death sentence. All you're doing is saying, I'm going to give this a go, but if you are going to give it a go, give it a really good go. Give it a really good go for 10 days or so. If it's a real no-no after 3 or 4, absolutely fine. But you never really know if something's working for you only after trying it for 2 or 3 days. Okay, so you need to give it a chance. Oh, I felt like I didn't breathe very well there. I need to do some more breathing. Right, okay. We're going to move into the next part of this, which is the kind of implications on training, nutrition, and so on. So we've kind of talked about food timing a little bit. Implications on training. Now, one of the fears, because of the hyperandrogenism, many women, I believe, and the conversations that I've had, when they are told that, they feel that if they train, they are going to turn into men, and they're going to build massive shoulders, big necks, and massive arms. Now, for some of you, you're thinking, that sounds like an absolute dream. But for many of you, I know that that has been a concern. What I would say is that even with a high level of androgens, say, take me, I think my testosterone levels are probably pretty good. Even with my level of training and the rate in which I, focus on my goals and things like that, it still takes me a really long time to grow muscle. Okay, it takes me a really long time, just like it does every other male, unless you're someone who's a hyper responder. So what I would say is, don't let this be a glass wall to you trying. It's very easy to be like, oh my God, I don't want to turn into a bloke, so I'm not going to train very hard, because if I do train very hard, I'm going to end up, gaining loads of muscle, and that'd be the worst thing. But what if you didn't? What if actually you started this journey and you realized you weren't one of the people who really gained muscle very quickly? Let's say for the last 2 years you've been putting off training hard and you've not really been enjoying your training recently, you've just been kind of going through the motions, and all of a sudden you think, all right, maybe Xander's right, I'll give it a go. For the next 2 months you start training harder, you're really enjoying it, you feel great, you feel like you're challenging your body, and as a result of all of this, you're improving your insulin sensitivity because your training's better, your activity's better. It comes full cycle and it helps us so much more. If, however, you do find that you are one of the people who grows muscle super quick, even if you do grow muscle at a rapid rate, it's not the case that it's going to turn up overnight. You're going to get a very good indication of this over time. So take measurements like you would always. Your tape measurements, your scale measurements, if you take them, progress photos, and more importantly, notice the way you plan your sessions. And this is the biggest one, which is why I've left it till last. I do not understand, and I've had these conversations with coaches who have PCOS, because we debate things quite a lot on Instagram. It's quite good fun. But the thing I don't understand is that if it were me and I was worried that I could grow too much muscle in a certain area, I either A, wouldn't train that area, or B, I would make sure the volume for that area was below the effective dose. In other words, if I was thinking, right, well, I could use this to my advantage and I could grow some thumping glutes, some nice hamstrings, decent quads. I would like some bigger shoulders actually, so I'll put some shoulders in. But let's say you're somebody who's really worried about your traps, okay? Now, obviously being male, you are going to, I'm talking about me here, as a male, I am going to be able to grow bigger shoulders and a bigger set of traps purely because of the androgen sites, right? Which means that the way that testosterone is carried through the body, it's going to be more receptive. I'm going to be able to grow a bigger upper body than, say, a female would be able to. Now, if you have higher levels of testosterone, that could be the same. So what I would be doing is saying, right, I want to stay clear of this, and this, but I do want this, this, and this. So I'd program for that. I'd program for that exactly like somebody who came to me and said, I have no interest in growing bigger shoulders. Okay, cool. In that case, we'll do some delt exercises that isolate the delts as well as we can do from the traps. We'll make sure we check your form videos so that we're not shrugging things and make sure that we are really focusing in on the movements we're doing. And of course, what we will make sure above all is that volume is where it needs to be. We're not going to be setting you 20 sets of shoulders because that is going to be a surefire way to grow a big set of shoulders. So we do have to be sensible here with the knowledge that we have, and we can't just be, oh, I'm going to train like normal and hope for the best. We have the knowledge. We know that we are potentially in a position where muscle growth is going to be at a higher rate. So play for that, right? Tone down the volume. My next part is going to be on nutrition. So we've talked about the timing a little bit. We've talked about a bit about the training. But in terms of the experiences I've had with clients, the clients I've had with PCOS tend to need a little bit more support around emotional eating. They tend to need more tools when it comes to managing emotional eating. And I believe there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is to do with hormone dysregulation. Now, with hormone dysregulation, that's not just going to be the hyperandrogenism, that's going to be across the board, and it's going to affect how you feel on a regular basis. And that means that if we're relying on food more to kind of as a crutch, as a coping mechanism, it's going to be more difficult because of all the things we've already discussed. If you are somebody with a very standard metabolic rate and you eat a bit more food, your metabolic rate will upregulate, and typically it will take care of that. But if you're not, then it might be likely that actually the more that you're eating as a result of the stress is compounding, and it is more difficult for you to then lose that as body fat. I'm not saying any of this to be a threat, and I hope that it's not coming across like that. I'm just trying to be very factual with how that is. So if you are somebody who struggles with the kind of hormonal dysregulation, and as a result of that eats more food, it's a difficult cycle because it's harder for you to regulate that body weight, and it's harder for you to then regulate the emotion with guilt, and we cycle, unfortunately, as a result. Another one I find is that clients with PCOS seem to have very painful bloating, and this can be aside from their period. This can be through the things they eat. So I will touch on a couple of things in a second that's going to help with that. And then the third and final one is, of course, the period itself. It can be very heavy, it can be very long, and it can be very painful. So when you look at those three things and how that can impact mood, and again how that can have an impact on your emotional eating and things like that, this is exactly why I say these folks, you guys, need more support with emotional eating and the tools that help you to move through that. Now, in terms of the emotional eating side of things, I'm not going to go into that. It's one for a different podcast, absolutely. And I've done a little bit of a touch on this before, but I would say that if you're somebody who struggles with emotional eating, I would absolutely tackle that first. I would tackle that first before I went down the road of trying to diet, because it's a little bit like trying to run with a parachute on, the parachute being your emotional eating. If we can get rid of that parachute and let you run, you're going to not only get greater results, or just phenomenal results compared to what you've been doing in the past, you stand a much better chance of holding on to them. And when you do those two things, your self-confidence and your self-efficacy will go through the roof. Self-efficacy is your self-belief that you will be able to do something. And I know for a fact that, like I said about my client earlier who dieted for ages on maintenance calories, she felt very low and lacked a lot of confidence because she felt like she was trying and wasn't going anywhere, and felt a bit broken, to be honest. So what we want to do is flip that and make you feel great. We want to help you to embrace this and go, right, how do I overcome it and what can I do to help me feel my best through this process? And that's by getting results. And so we need to do the things that are going to help you to get there. When it comes to things like painful bloating, this is where food hygiene is so important. And I don't mean washing your food before you cook it. It's a little bit like sleep hygiene. Food hygiene is not just what you eat, it's how you're eating and the time and the presence. So for example, are you somebody who is running around eating on the move? Are you somebody who quickly grabs something and runs to the office? Are you somebody who is eating whilst trying to keep up with a meeting that's going on? Are you present with the meal? Are you tasting the food? Do you smell your food? I don't mean lifting it up to your face and giving it a good whiff, but I mean, I don't know if you've seen some of the cookery shows like MasterChef and things like that. The guys almost eat the fucking spoon. Like that's how much depth they're trying to get with the flavor. So we need to be doing the same thing. We need to be sitting there, no electrical devices, tasting the food, chewing the food, enjoying the textures and the food experience. This is a really big one, the food experience. Satiation and satiety, the two things that we feel both full enough to finish a meal and then the continuation of that fullness. Both of those things are based on not only how much you eat and the calories and the food itself, but how we consume it. Are we satisfied by the meal that we've had? Or do we leave ourselves needing more because we've not really enjoyed it? We've not really sat with it and indulged ourselves in the meal that we're having. It's a really big one, and I challenge even those of you without PCOS to consider that in a way of improving things like your bloating if you are somebody who struggles with that. A lot of the ladies I work with who struggle with bloating are little sprint eaters. Basically, wolf it down, run out the door, or they get in, wolf it down. So, I think a lot of foods get a bad rap for this. A lot of the time it's how we eat them, at least in my experience. And typically those people who struggle with a lot more stress management, they are also people who tend to struggle a lot more with bloating. The next one is obviously, we spoke about painful periods. If you are somebody who struggles with those and it's a really difficult thing, I actually find the best thing to do around this time is to increase calories. It's not to try and diet through these periods. Typically, people push back on this. They'll say, I'm fine, I just want to get this done. But what's the point? Think about all the things you have to risk and all the things you have to lose by potentially adding loads more pressure at this point in time where the process can just go boom any second and you end up eating 8,000 calories across a weekend. That's not just blown the calories that you've worked really hard for during this week, but also last week's deficit as well. So is it really worth it? Is it actually better to say, right, actually what we're going to do, we're going to use this as an island. I love the term island. It's really friendly and I picture this lovely warm place with little palm trees, a little bit like the one on Pirates of the Caribbean, if you're a Pirates of the Caribbean fan. The island is there to just give us a rest, give us a little breather, give us a little break. It's not there to set us back 30 feet from where we started. And this is what I truly believe people think maintenance is. A lot of people think that maintenance is, we're going backwards, we're not achieving. Well, I tell you what, sometimes in video games, they randomly save it for you. Why do they do that? Because they want you to keep playing the game. They want you to feel like you're getting somewhere, because in a minute, you're probably going to die in the video game, and then it'll take you back to that little bit. Imagine if in a video game, there were no takebacks. Imagine that. You're just playing along, bang, straight back to the beginning, and you spent 5 hours. No one would play. But we treat fat loss phases like they're video games with no pauses, and we have to just go, go, go. But guess what? 9 times out of 10, what happens is you do fail in that process and you do go back to the start. So it's no wonder you feel that level of almost demoralized and frustration because you keep having to start again, not just from the beginning, but 10 pounds the other side of that beginning. Use appropriate milestones. And if each time you have a cycle, it might be once every 2, 3, 4, 5 months, that comes around, take a break. Actively increase the calories and enjoy a little bit of extra food, because the cravings are going to be higher, and due to the pain and bloating and soreness of your cycle, you are going to probably want a little bit more food just as support. That's okay. It's absolutely okay, and you'll be at maintenance anyway. The thing that it feels weird is that you're choosing to do that, but the fact you're choosing to do that gives you control. Control is choice. So if we manage that choice and we take the good thing, the good self-management, we will do so much better. Nice. And I said I would leave you guys with one thing. Now, obviously, I am not a woman, and clearly, therefore, I do not have PCOS. However, I do know what it is like to have something where sometimes you just don't feel like there's any point in going forwards. And I do believe I've had this with pretty much every client I've ever had that's had PCOS, where they get to a point where they're just like, what's the point? What's the point in going forward if I can't achieve this? In fact, I do believe Laura spoke about this in the podcast I did with her, where she said to me, you know, if I can't achieve the goals I want, is there any point in me trying? Is there any point in me going to the gym? And this was a fantastic question and a huge show of vulnerability from her. And this is pretty much what I said to her, you know, and this is how I understand this. So I had, for those of you who know me well, you know I've had a number of knee surgeries now. I underwent 3 knee surgeries and my knee still wasn't right. It just kept giving way. It was very, very painful most days. You know, walking downhill was a struggle. I was a PT at the time. Doing that was a struggle, you know, staying on my feet all day, and it just was very, very painful and very, very frustrating. I then had 2 renowned surgeons tell me that it was all mental and I was basically stuck with it. And the second surgeon basically said to me, look, you're going to be stuck with this. So, you know, it's going to be about learning to live with it now. And it's heartbreaking. It was really heartbreaking for me when I heard that, because I've always played sport. And for those of you who know my history with mental health, you'll know that education never was my thing. It was always sport for me. So when I look at that, I remember never giving up. I remember thinking, well, if this is what it's going to be, I'm going to make this as best as it can be, because I am not going to fail as long as I try. And this is what really got me out of the rut. I mean, it was a big rut, but it was this kind of mentality of, I was an athlete, I will set myself some goals and I'll go chase them down, because what else is there? What else is there? What other point is there? And there's 2 options. You try and you make ground moving forwards, even slowly, or you don't bother. But, you know, like my granddad always said to me, it's better to regret the things you did than you didn't. And I also think that you stand a great chance in improving your quality of life. You stand a great chance in improving your quality and self-esteem and mentality and mindset. So when you're thinking like, there's no point because, you know, all of these things are against me, you know, you might have, well, you likely have family members because PCOS is hereditary. And they are very overweight, which means I'm going to be overweight, and they struggle with this, which means so there's just no point in me doing these things. But what if the reason that they struggle like that is because they didn't do these things, and you have an opportunity now that you've listened to this podcast, or the fact that you hunted down these podcasts, to do those things. So there is always a point. There is always a point. And just like for me, eventually I got my 4th and my 5th surgeries. I'm not saying that there's going to be that fix, but I can tell you this for free. I'd never have been given that 4th surgery if I didn't put the work in to get myself there. Because when I went to see the surgeon I went to see, arguably the best knee surgeon in the world, he could see how much effort I'd put in and how badly I wanted it, that he was like, okay, I can see that you've really given this everything you've got, we'll give it a go. And I'd say the same thing to you. I look at the clients I work with now and have worked with over the years who've had PCOS. I can tell you, hand on heart, none of them have regretted putting in the work. They've all made amazing progress. And when I say amazing progress, it may not look amazing to the outside world, but it is amazing compared to the progress that they believed that they were capable of making when they first started. And what better result can you ask for than that? To show someone they are capable of far more than they thought they were, and they started the journey on a whim. They got a coach because they thought, well, I'm a bit lost and I need to throw something like this and I'll give it a go. And they got to that point. There is no greater win than that. So I say all of this, and I kind of introduce my journey there a little bit to say, you know, I do understand what it's like when you're at a bit of a road's end with some of these things, but I also know what it's like to just having to keep going, because you will get there and you will be able to make ground. The key points I'd leave you with are these 3. You'll make ground at your own rate based on the inputs that you have and the significance of the circumstances you're challenged with. So Base that solely on you. Comparing yourself will not help you in the slightest. Compare your efforts more than anything. The second point is you have an opportunity here. You know, I say this to a lot of my clients, it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility. It's not your fault that you struggle with PCOS, but it's your responsibility for you and your body now to take the best care of it and to do the things that make you feel the best, because nobody else can do that for you. And my third and final point, which I've kind of just, you know, touched on already here, is it's always worth giving it a shot, because what do you have to lose? You have everything to lose in not trying, but you have everything to gain if you do. So if there's anything that I can do to help you, whether that's just a quick chat or you have any questions, please do fire them my way. But it's always, always, always worth giving this a go. That is going to be it from me. There are a couple of things that we could touch on a bit more if people are interested. There are a couple of supplements that help in terms of PCOS, but to be honest, the majority of them very much surround things like insulin resistance. So you have inositol, which helps to improve insulin resistance. You also have things like omega-3s. Generally speaking, you know, you've got vitamin D as well. Omega-3 and vitamin D, two very good supplements pretty much everyone could be taking, especially vitamin D through the winter months. Inositol is essentially a carbohydrate. It's got the same format as glycerol, I believe, but it has cell signaling. So the cell signaling helps to manage blood sugar levels, which is super helpful if you are insulin resistant. There are a couple more, but I didn't want to really talk about supplements as much. I wanted to kind of give that as a little tidbit in case people wanted me to go through it in more detail. If so, please let me know. That is all for me today, folks. I hope this has helped. I hope this has inspired in some way, shape or form. And I hope that this has made you feel listened to, heard, and above all, supported. All the love, folks. Take good care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.